talking with God about kings and kingdoms. We're in 1 Kings chapter 4. Title for this week's talk is Manifesting Wisdom, baby. Come on in, let's check it out together.
All the Bubbas of the world, we got one mission in mind.
Welcome to the Biblical Channel. Always glad somebody is showing up. We just like to get people in touch with their Bibles, man. God has put together a great story, and when we get in touch with that story, things just happen for the better. We get wise, we get smart, and loving God, it turns out, puts us in touch with his story, and that's what loving people, is all about, understanding their story. And so God has put together a story in history. That's why the Bible comes across, as, one of the most interesting documents of all time, because it has withstood the test of time, and it has spanned generations and generations and generation in a story alone, and it has lasted thousands of years as well. Anywho, that's where we are. We want to get people from the bullshit to the holy shit so that we can shoot the shit and know our shit. End of story. Plain and simple. Have fun. Love God. Jump into the Bible and get to know the story, man. Well, anyhow, chapter 4 of 1 Kings. We are, in this record-keeping point of history. Jesus would call this whole section, this whole old part of the Bible, the Hebrew portion of the Bible, the prophets. And so when God speaks to people, they are prophets. When God happens to them in dreams, they're prophets. And Solomon is a prophet. As much as he's a king, he also is a prophet. And I think that it's easy to understand that the prophets put together the storyline of the Bible, including this material right here. And so there's a writer behind the scenes doing the hard work of thinking about how to record what God did and to also put it in a package that is going to withstand the test of history, and to also put it into a package that requires us to sit back with our ears and our eyes of love, loving God and wanting to know God, to reflect on it and say, oh, wow, this is what I get out of it. The Bible does not read coarsely or crassly or even directly in so many places. It allows for us to enjoy the story and then to contemplate the story with each other. And that's what we're doing here. And that's how you get the most out of this stuff, because you will inevitably run into boring material. And you think to yourself, my goodness, why would you ever put this in here? But the boring material is forming an important part of the story. Let's just dive into this section and see what we mean. 1 Kings chapter 4. Remember, in 1 Kings chapter 3, Solomon was asked by God, what do you want me to do for you? Which was good news that God had intervened. Solomon became king, apparently without a lot of inquiry as to what God wanted. So it is good news that God speaks to Solomon. And when he speaks to Solomon, he says, well, what do you want? And Solomon says exactly the right thing and exactly what we should all hear. And you ought to check out last week's talk. But basically, Solomon says, I need wisdom, baby. I need a lot of wisdom. If I'm going to continue on with the blessing that you started with David, my father, and if I'm going to be king over Israel, I have to, because I'm like a kid in understanding what it takes to know the difference between good and evil, and also how that applies to life. So he asks for wisdom, and God, and not wisdom for himself. It's not like he asks for the wisdom that would be able to determine the stock market. That's not the kind of wisdom he asks for. It's the kind of wisdom that applies life in people's lives for the betterment of people's lives. And to be able to sort through the difference between good and evil. And so he is given this. Now, chapter 4 comes along and starts off with what seems to be the most boring of, how in the world are we supposed to know these people? Zadok the priest and Jehoshaphat, and Benaniah. We hardly hear anything about these characters. Nathan, is there, and then how about Ben-Hur? Well, there's a movie made about Ben-Hur, but not this Ben-Hur. Ben-Hur's just a popular name. Then there's Ben Decker, Beth Shemesh. There's all these people in here, and they don't get a story. They just get an honorable mention in the story. And so for us, we're like, oh, why should I be interested in these people? Because previously, Solomon asked for wisdom, and God said, spot on, Solomon, that's exactly what you should ask for. And not for your own sake, but for the sake of other people is the reason for asking for wisdom. So, God and Solomon have a high five moment coming into chapter 4. Chapter 4's list of boring, people supposedly that we don't know is all about answering that question, how wisdom comes to Solomon. So it is the people that God has in Solomon's life and the people that Solomon brings into his life that form the basis of this wisdom that is coming at Solomon. There's no doubt that the text emphasizes Solomon's personal wisdom, but the personal wisdom that Solomon has is coming from his ability to work in a group, to surround himself with good counsel, to surround himself with the right people. And that's why these people make it in here, because they were the right people to bring and to help Solomon be wise. So wisdom, biblically, from God's point of view, wisdom, number one, comes from God. And then when wisdom comes from God, look out. If you really want God's wisdom, then God will bring and send people into your life, and you ought to be looking for the right people that are going to give you the right godly wisdom, people who have a track record of knowing godly wisdom. And you need to surround yourself with people who actually are on the same page as God's wisdom. It's not a spooky formula. It's not a whiz-bang formula. It is also kind of the boring formula of life of surrounding yourself with the right people. That's where wisdom gets the most traction, and that's what chapter 4 is all about. The wisdom that God grants to Solomon comes in the form of sending a bunch of people, good people, into Solomon's life, and Solomon being able to use these good people for what they are worth. To wring the chamois out of life the best possible way is to have good people in your life. I try to be a good person in everybody's life by helping them to understand the pages of the Bible here. And also to my neighbors, on the street that I live in, the community that I live in, the churches that I attend, it's a matter of surrounding yourself with good people, being available to people, and making sure that you're always in the company of the right people that are trying to see the promises of God work themselves out. So that is, the reason for the boring list. I know we don't know any of these people, and we're not going to be interested in these people, and there's no personal stories about these people, but these people are the wisdom that God promised to give to Solomon. And the result is also, very, very important here. The result is exactly what Solomon had asked for. He wants this wisdom, not so he can play the stock market or not so he can do himself any great, achievements or do himself, some great favors. It's about other people. And so in verse 20, Judah and Israel were as happy, as many as the sand by the sea. They ate and they drank and they were happy. That's a very important, add-on to what happens there. So this company of good people that God sends in response to wisdom produces the result that Solomon was looking for. He wanted to be able to sort out the difference between good and evil so that he could govern people. And what governing people really looks like is getting out of their way and providing the basic structures of government so that they can pursue happiness. Pursuing happiness is actually the coin of phrase that the Bible gave to Thomas Jefferson, in his Declaration of Independence. Pursuing happiness is what we all want to do. It is what we were born to do. It is what God created us to do. God created us to pursue happiness. He created us to pursue happiness with Him. And from God's point of view, He is the source of true happiness. And so what we see here is Judah and Israel are numbered as many as the sand of the sea. We're starting, what we remember that language from is the promise that God made to Abraham that He was going to make His people, He was going to make His kids, He was going to make His progeny, as numerous as the sand on the sea, that these people are now eating and drinking and being happy. That is, they aren't happy because government is telling them what to do. They're happy because government is doing what it should be doing, and that is just benefiting the people so that they can pursue their lives of happiness. And this is all part of God's fulfillment. And so really this chapter 4 is almost like a high watermark in the kingdom of Israel, because, Solomon is doing what David never got a chance to do, but David paved the way for Solomon to do this, and Solomon is doing this, and this is awesome. But it also gives us a picture of what wisdom actually looks like. It's no weird formula. It's no, specially endowed knowledge. It's the right people in your life bringing God's knowledge that He has given us into our lives. And when that happens, guess what? People eat, drink, and they be merry, and they're happy, and they're pursuing their happiness. Solomon rules over these kingdoms from the Euphrates, and so there's a people, place, and peace that is on view here. A people, place, peace, and happiness that is on view here, that is occurring because wisdom is having its way in the life of Solomon and the government around. And consequently, this flows from God. God wants just this. So wisdom comes from God. God sends people. The wisdom that he sends to us through His words and through the counsel of people around us is for people. So government is supposed to be for the people, by the people, of the people. Just like Abraham Lincoln said, And that, too, is not his turn of phrase that he invented. This is the idea embedded in life here on earth, especially life where we have distance between us and God because we're outside of the garden. This is the substance of good government, is wisdom that comes from God, is taken on board to really, assemble a cast and crew of people who are going to guide you well. And it's for the sake of others. It's not for the sake of yourself. It's not for patting yourself on the back or giving yourself a, page into the history books. It's so that you would do well for other people. And then consequently, wisdom goes out to everybody, and it has this produced effect of making people happy and making people peaceful and getting along with neighbors. Don't miss that here. There's no racism going on in this text. A lot of people like to see the Old Testament as, God telling Israel that they were best because of their ethnicity, and that's not the case. That is a lie. That is a bad reading of the text. This group of people that is called Israel right now, in these lists of people, there are people outside of the land of Israel that are included in the land of Israel. And the people that are surrounding the lands of Israel are actually enjoying this, wisdom that is coming from God for the sake of the people. Israel, at this moment under Solomon's regime has great neighbors, and that's what life is all about. At a personal level, you should be a great influence on your neighbors, and your neighbors ought to enjoy you, and there ought to be peace and happiness in the neighborhood because of you and neighbors. The same thing applies here to Israel. If they are doing it right, if they are seeking God's wisdom, then indeed they ought to be creating a national surrounding of other nations that are also enjoying them as neighbors. And that too is what's going on in the text. Everything is going great. So there's a little braggadocio going on here. Solomon has all these horses and all that, and that's wrong. There's nothing wrong with this wealth, except that it has the potential to get weird. And the kings, not the people of Israel, but the kings of Israel are told to make sure that you don't take on wealth like the other nations build wealth for you, the king, personally. So here, it's hard for us to judge whether or not this is an excess. The author of this text is definitely bragging that things are going really well. And it's fine for Solomon's palace to be doing really well. It's fine for Solomon's, government to be doing well, as long as the people are doing very well and they're happy and pursuing happiness and doing well and are able to do well. Well, yeah, and if you're not able to do well, then you're not happy. So through that, we see that, God, and this is verse 29, God has given Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure. This is what the wisdom package looks like. But there's one last trajectory of wisdom here. And that is coming up in verse 29. God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure and breadth of mind, like the sand on the seashore. Again, remembering Abraham's promises. God has not forgot about Abraham's promises. He's fulfilled his promises. Everything has gone very, very, well on God's point of view, although Israel made it rough on themselves. But this idea of Solomon having this wisdom that God promised him comes up 6 times in this last, little bit of chapter 4. And Solomon has this wisdom that surpasses all other people. And so there's some people that I suppose have the reputation of wisdom. Ethan, the Ezraite, Heman, Kalkol, and Darda, Saul, and Mahol. I don't know these people, but apparently they have the reputation of being very wise. And Solomon's wisdom is passing them up, mostly because they're a part of Solomon's wisdom. So Solomon is gathering up some really smart people in his life, and he has a good reputation. But here's the next trajectory of wisdom. It now says that Solomon, with his wisdom, spoke 3,000 proverbs, that he sings 1,005 songs. He speaks of trees. He speaks of cedars in Lebanon to the hyssop, which is just some sort of weed plant that grows out of the wall. He is observing scientifically everything that's going on. So what's happening here is that wisdom, if you have godly wisdom, then you're interested in everything, which is a far cry from the way that people portray godly wisdom. And it's, but people are on the inside like you and me. We know that true wisdom gives us a confidence to be interested in absolutely everything. We don't have to shy away from anything other than what is just nasty. We can, embrace and kind of come into any sphere and examine it and investigate it. Solomon's wisdom, went, into people's lives and out into nature. And so the picture that wisdom gives us here, biblically speaking, is the picture of science, is part of wisdom's outreach. Science observes nature. Science observes people. Science observes all things. Science, and wisdom together start looking at everything with an interest level so that you understand wisdom. Wisdom's ultimate benefit is not just knowing the difference between good and evil, but how to live life to the fullest. What is truly the best thing for us? I remember a guy, he became a Christian, and he said, and early on, and he said, what's interesting is that we're very selfish, and that's true as people, but we're not even good at being selfish because we pick all the shittiest things to hurt us, not help us. So I always appreciated his words. I thought he was right, that not only are we selfish, but we're actually bad at being selfish, because we don't pick the really good things. If we were good at being selfish, we would pick God every time, because that's the best thing for us. And it brings us the most amount of happiness and the most amount of peace. And that's exactly the trajectory of wisdom in this passage. Can't help but to notice that wisdom given to Solomon is for other people, and other people are feeding into the wisdom regime that's going on. And Solomon's wisdom should be like all of our wisdom. It is now heading into everything, examining everything, looking at everything. Wisdom just seeks understanding. You see, faith itself seeks understanding. It's no problem to not understand something. To have faith and not understand something is cool. Our faith gives us the strength to go in and try to figure things out to the best of our ability. And so what we get confused about is we want our understanding to seek faith. And that's the wrong way to go. Have faith in God, have love for God, have an absolute love affair with God, and then seek understanding. Look into things, talk with people, but don't ever lose the love that you have for God. And I say that love stuff because that's how Solomon loved God. And in Solomon's love for God, God appeared to him in a dream, and Solomon was, asked the right question, a question that we should ask. Ask God that you would have wisdom. Ask God that he would bring people into your life. Look at other people and ask yourself, are these people good with God's wisdom? And if they're not, gently just move them to the side and look for people who are good with God's wisdom and keep them close. And then when you have that kind of network of people in your life, you can go anywhere and do anything with great confidence. And just like we find here, all people of all nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom, they came to see Solomon. Genuine godly wisdom is very attractive, and it has this effect of attracting people because your wisdom is for other people. When people get the vibe that your wisdom is for them, and that means not being a pompous, pedantic prick, but your wisdom is for them, and then they feel the effects of you and your wisdom. That, my friends, is the picture that emerges here. Wisdom is faith seeking understanding, no problem, gives us confidence, rings the chamois of life out to the best of its ability. But it all begins, like Solomon, with asking for God for wisdom and then looking for the people that God has in our lives and making the best use of godly people in our lives so that we can build our wisdom and so that we can, look out for other people and think best between good and evil as it applies to life. How do we apply good and evil to life? How do we wring the chamois of life out to the best of its ability? That's wisdom, baby. And it's not for me, it's for others. But when I'm looking for it for others, it benefits me and it makes me confident to get out in the world and pursue anything and everything. And to examine things and be able to set things aside and say, no, okay, I can, to categorize things, to put things in the right places. What is good? What is evil? Well, there we have it, my friends. Solomon pursuing wisdom. It's happening, baby. This is a highlight reel chapter in 1 Kings. It might even be the most, climactic of all Hebrew Bible passage, chunks of text. There are going to be rough spots ahead, but don't forget, Jesus comes along. Okay. Anyhow, we'll end our time right there.